We're back with Cultures TV, speaking about the hashtag Oscars So White controversy and some of the diversity issues facing America today. So, ladies, we talked about Janet Hubert, we talked about Jada Pinkett Smith, Will Smith. What about Stacey Dash, who's a Republican and she appears on Fox News quite a bit? And her position is, if we really don't want segregation and we think things should be diverse, we shouldn't have a BET Awards. We shouldn't have a Black History Month, which is exactly the opposite of Jada's comments, whether we agree with whether those comments are correct or not. What's your position on those thoughts?
But it's about whose stories are being told. And I think about that with the media, with the Oscars, with films. I was reading about the Coen brothers, what they had to say, and on one hand they said diversity is important, and then on the other hand they said, well, we write stories and we don't think about what identity each character is going to have. And to me, that says that if we're not deliberately thinking about diversity, we're defaulting to the norm. Right. So white people are going to be writing about white characters and the nuances of these white characters, and then there's side characters that are people of color, and that just continues what people are consuming with the media.
Which is interesting because Shonda Rhimes, who's arguably one of the most successful writers, I guess producers too in Hollywood right now, people ask her about diversity all the time and she's a little dumbfounded because she's like, this is just my world. This is the world. I cast people in my shows that look like the world around me. And if more people thought about that or thought like that, then it wouldn't be an issue, you know, because yeah, you look around and there's people, depends on where you live, of course. She lives in Hollywood, so it's a little bit more diverse. But for her, it's a non-issue. So how do you feel about that? So we want people to tell the stories, but what if they don't know what the stories are? How do we get them there?
Well, we're getting more voices involved. So if Shonda Rhimes is talking about this is her world, that's why it's valuable that she's telling her truth. And that there are a lot of people represented, and if we bring more people in who are telling their own truths and their communities, and all of us are telling stories that are representative of the real world. TV stations now, the networks, are being charged with marking their diversity numbers and assessing how it portrays reality. And so they're looking from this Oscars fiasco for the movie studios, the big six, to be doing that as well, to be saying, okay, who's involved, who's in the room, and how is this telling reality in our country? And I mean, Will Smith was talking a little bit about how, you know, bringing all these realities together. I think that fits a little bit.
And I do think it does require a laser focus to make sure that you're being very thoughtful about what you're saying and what you're doing and who you're involving. Because I also see that there's some risk, and not to use a derogatory word, but for tokenism, where we're doing it just because we have to, not because we believe in it in spirit and it's not a part of our consciousness. It's because it's the right thing to do. I do worry that sometimes those things have happened and it has diminished the value of really looking at diversity in a way that is meaningful and thoughtful. I think if there is a purpose behind it and people are doing it in a fashion that is putting that message out there, that's one thing. It's a different thing when we'll have a black person, an Asian person, or someone show up in an ad just because it makes it look like we're being conscious. And I do think that's kind of been the default, but there has to be a lot more capacity built in to make sure that all the stories are authentic, they're real, they're presented, and that people understand that that's what they're there for. It's not just because we're doing it for the sake of doing it.
I mean, you have to put the work in. It takes a lot of effort to do that, to think about outside of yourself, and that takes time.
And it takes the relinquishment of power.
Yeah.
There are power situations in play here. Certain stories aren't told for a reason. Tokenism becomes a thing because certain stories are acceptable in mainstream society while others are considered to be deviant. And one of the ways that you can combat that is putting more people in positions of power to write the stories, to create the stories, to produce the stories. But once again, that goes back to economic empowerment because you're talking about blockbusters and million-dollar movies and billion-dollar franchises here. So If they feel like those stories aren't going to be told, then they're not going to write those stories, especially if they don't value those stories.
Right. If they're
or
making
if
money from stories.
or if those stories undermine or diminish the power that they have within society.
Yeah, but it's just a cycle.
So clearly we're not going to find the answers today, but many more questions and hopefully a good discussion that'll get you going, and you can take this back to your neighborhoods and see what difference you can make. Remember, at Cultures, we speak your language.